Hello, good listeners. Welcome to Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, a show about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. I'm your host, Dan Dick. Thanks for tuning in. Today I welcome Roland Sawatsky. Roland is the curator of history at the Manitoba Museum and a past curator at the Mennonite Heritage Village Museum in Steinbach. Welcome to Tales, Roland.
Thank you.
We last had you on the program to talk about the Mennonite Brumtup tradition, but today we're going to mine your brain and your research on house barns. For listeners who might not know what a house barn is, can you briefly describe one?
Yeah, it's a fairly simple structure. It's a house connected to a barn.
Did you get a lot of slivers and splinters in your research?
No, I did step on a nail once, which wasn't great. But I had my tetanus shot, so I was okay.
Good for you. In local popular culture, we might like to think that Mennonites invented the house barn concept, but I don't think that's true. Where does the layout come from, and how far back in history can the idea be traced?
The idea of the house barn goes back about 4,000 to 6,000 years ago in Northern Europe and Scandinavia. That is a house connected to a stable with animals in it sharing the same ridge line. And with sort of...
By ridge line, you mean the roof line?
The roof line, yeah.
Ridge and roof line.
And often with an Overseed in Low German, but an overhang on one side as well. So it's a very, very old architectural style from Northern Europe, and it was common across from all the way from the Netherlands to Poland, and that's where the Russian Mennonites, so-called Russian Mennonites, lived for centuries. So it's no surprise, really, that they picked up and utilized in that architectural form and made it part of their culture.
What were some practical reasons to have a house barn?
Well, in southern Ukraine, Russia, it was useful for protecting animals from other people, from potential predators, etc., because people were right beside it. They could hear any commotion. In Canada, it was very useful for staying warm for both the animals and the people because you're sharing a wall, and when you need to tend to the animals, you can go right in there. And some Mennonites also used the manure troughs as their own toilets as well in the winter.
It's like the farming version of a mall.
Exactly.
In historical journals and diaries, I often see the Low German word GANK mentioned. What is the GANK?
Mm-hmm.
Am I even pronouncing that right?
Yes, the GANK is simply a hallway. It's a little passage from one place to another, and the main living quarters of the house portion of the house barn didn't have a GANK except to connect the kitchen to the stable. Sometimes, if the house was larger, there would be a little hallway there.
Are there other ways a house barn divides spaces, for example, between adults and children, or men and women, or insiders and outsiders?
Oh, absolutely. And every house does this around the world. In the house barn, girls would often sleep in what was called the kleine stove between the parents' bedroom and the kitchen.
The kleine stove being the small room.
The small room, yes. And then the boys would often be in a bedroom that was somewhat separate and was between the formal main entrance of the house and the entrance to the barn. And so, as children, they are close to what they're expected to be as adults. So, young girls were raised to be women working on the farm, raising children in the house, and so they're close to the kitchen and to the family. And the boys, they're meant to be working outside in the fields with the animals and also being near the entrances to the house. They have that public aspect as well. So in historical Mennonite tradition, men had a public voice in the church or in community events, and women were very much in charge of what we call the private realm or the domestic realm of the house. Now, this wasn't exclusive, of course. Women did have a public voice in certain situations, did work in the field in certain situations. Both men and women worked in the barn with the animals. And, of course, men were in the private zone as well. So this is not an exclusive thing, but it's a general division of labor and what was considered appropriate behavior for men and women at the time.
What about the division between insiders and outsiders?
Yes, depends what you consider an outsider and an insider. Certainly, a Mennonite village, which was along a single street with house barns relatively equal distant to each other on both sides of the street. Usually, when the village was built, it was on one side, and then the other side would be filled up. In that situation, an outsider, non-Mennonite coming in, would not necessarily know whose house was who. They would all kind of look the same to an outsider, but an insider, somebody from that village or from another Mennonite village, would know what the differences were. Some houses are slightly larger than others. That's already telling you a lot. Where in the village a house is, if it's closer to the center or if it's further to the end, that can tell you something about social status as well. So there was a lot to be read by insiders and a lot that was obscured from outsiders. Certainly, an insider, like a villager, would know by looking at a house barn exactly what rooms were used by what people and where those rooms were, because they were that similar to each other. Once you get Mennonites buying and building different types of houses, that again becomes obscured to the insiders as well. They don't know exactly who's where in that house or how it works. There's a lot more privacy in those houses. There are hallways with separate cells as bedrooms, whereas in a house barn, there's a central hearth, and then the rooms are arranged around that hearth. So to get to your room, you might have to go through somebody else's. So the whole concept of privacy was quite different.
How much did non-Mennonites see from the inside of a house barn?
Well, certainly they could be invited, and we have accounts of outsiders of villages. There's a book published exactly about that, about historical accounts. And usually the outsiders would be invited into the Grotestove, which was the largest room in the house. It was very formal. It was closed off most of the day for other people's use. There were display items in there. And there was often something like, the dowry chest and a wall clock and a wall cabinet that was glass with shelves in it where there would be knickknacks in there. These kinds of things that were common in a lot of the houses.
Bit of a show space.
Almost. A show space, yeah. An off-limits show space. And so that's where you might have an outsider come in and have them and show them your sort of finest and give them the finest view of things. What's interesting is that people often think of Mennonites as very practical, and they were, but it wasn't everything. Imagine a house with 2 parents, a grandparent, and let's say 10 kids, and the largest room in the house is off limits. That's not practical. It's something else entirely. And it was a symbolic space. It was very much used for different activities that were formal, like a formal meeting, but also if the elders were coming for whatever reason. If you had relatives coming from far away, you would entertain there. If there was a funeral or a wedding, that might be where it took place. And then also, there were objects in there that were symbolic. That wall cabinet with the knickknacks, that was very much a woman's space. You couldn't remove this cabinet. It was built into the wall, right in the center of the house.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and that, to me, says something about the permanence and the importance and the centrality of the woman in the home, in that culture at that time, and the power she had in that house as well. And the things she's displaying, a lot of those things are gifts from other people, from relatives, for instance. And it's a way for her to show her relations, which were equally as important as the men's relations. The man of the house had a corner cabinet in the opposite corner of the woman's cabinet, and this was closed. And in there you would find things like, Bibles and hymnals and the martyr's mirror, but also a fish gutting knife, special medicines, some brandy, and tobacco, things that shouldn't be touched by other people. And so it's very closed off, very formal again. And my dad had stories about that when he was a kid, and how when his dad was gone, he would go and smoke some of his cigarettes, and he was like 12. So these kinds of stories come up with these kinds of objects, and a lot of that came out in interviews I did over the years.
I love those kinds of stories.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the thick milled timbers used in house barns. When I think of a tree cut into heavy timbers, I think of large trees. Did any southern Manitoba builders of house barns source trees large enough to mill those big beams?
There was a Mennonite who got some large tracts of land in North Dakota that had oak. And he sold a lot of the oak to the Mennonite farmers in southern Manitoba to build their houses with. So a lot of that oak actually came from just over the border. There were some oak stands in Manitoba along the rivers, not too much, but Mennonites cleared those out pretty quick. And then in southeastern Manitoba, Steinbach area, we do find some tamarack as well. And both oak and tamarack are very good for building because in log structures because they're quite rot resistant. And if you put it on a stone foundation that's above grade, it can last a long, long time.
Were there any mills in Manitoba that supplied Mennonite house barn builders?
I'm not sure about that. By the late 1880s, when the railway was completed across Canada, then you got a lot of really high-quality fir coming in. But these were 2x6s, or in some cases 2x8s. And some Mennonites decided it was a good idea to replicate the building method of grain elevators for their homes. So stacked horizontally, one on top of the other, those were the walls, these giant, fir planks. And I don't think you could shoot a cannon through those walls. They're incredibly dense. But a problem with that type of building is that there's a lot of horizontal cracks that if water gets in, it might not get out. And that attracts, wood-eating insects. So that can be a problem, but certainly it was an interesting attempt with new wood technologies that weren't available before.
In some house barns, the wood joinery shows that the carpenters were real masters of their craft. How were these skills developed and shared in a community?
Well, children learned basic geometry in school, and they learned that for the purpose of building. So they were all expected to have some skill when it came to building. But basically, a lot of villages were settled by family groups, and they were expected to help each other with everything, including building.
Did you find anything of use for your house barn research at the MHA? Is there a vacuum of?
No, certainly. There were glass negatives from Neubergtal from that period. It was absolutely essential for my research. Those were found in a barn, I believe in a chicken coop. Some were actually used for windows in the chicken coop, these glass negatives. They were retrieved and cleaned up and then went into the archives here. And amazing source, because you see photographs from about 1910 to about 1930, so you can actually see the shift in how people are changing their house barns over time, which reflects shifts in society.
Thanks so much, Roland, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
I've been speaking with Dr. Roland Sawatsky about his research on Mennonite house barns. Roland is the curator of history at the Manitoba Museum and a past curator at the Mennonite Village Museum in Steinbach. To learn more about this topic or to hear this episode again, visit mharchives.ca. The Tales team welcomes your comments and questions about this program via email at info@mharchives.ca.
Hello, I'm Archivist Conrad Stace. The Mennonite Heritage Archives is a community-supported memory center that relies on donations from community members like you. To support this program and the preservation of Mennonite history, visit mharchives.ca and click on Support, or give us a call at 204-560-1998. Thanks also to our partners, Canadian Mennonite University, the Centre for Transnational Mennonite Studies, Mennonite Church Canada, and Golden West Radio.
Join us next week for a story from 1863 that involves a pig pen, a baby, and a mother's attempts to get rid of her child. Thanks to the Tales team of Conrad Stace and David Klippenstein. Remember that you can find over 50 episodes of Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives online at mharchives.ca. Thanks for listening.